I think we're live.
Hey, everybody. We are live.
Oh,
And guess who's not here?
Guess who just
I'm
popped
here.
in?
Oh,
I'm here.
right on
Yeah.
time. Nice.
Wow. Thank you for
jackass.
Yeah. Thank you for making your presence. We appreciate it. We were a little concerned because after our last particular live stream, we heard that the guests decided they wanted to be housed at Guantanamo Bay for safekeeping. So we're glad you showed up here today. And I heard a lot. There's a lot of stuff I've heard about you, and I want you to dispel, either confirm or dispel some rumors that JR passed. And of course, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do a joke if you so choose. And then we're going to go into Mmtlp. That's kind of what we're going to do. Obviously, not legal advice. You can say hello, by the way, Kurtis, if you'd like to.
Hello. Yeah.
Nice.
Good to see you guys. Glad
nice.
to hang out.
Always great to have you. JR, you want to say hello?
I did say hello already.
Okay, you can say hello again. So, not legal advice, JR and Kurtis, and this obviously it really is not legal advice. And by the way, if anybody want to do me a favor, is follow me at Not Legal Advice, one word, on X, because my prior account got hacked, and unfortunately, I think Elon is with Doge in DC and not trying to fix my account. I think I attribute Doge to not my account not being fixed. So at Not Legal Advice, one word, please follow, and then we can get more of these videos out to a broader audience. That's the idea. Anyway, great to have Kurtis here tonight. Excuse me. Per my last X tweet, whatever you call that. What do you call that, Kurtis? What do you call when you do something on X?
Post. Let's just call it a post.
Okay. My last post, I learned that Kurtis could not be with us, but his twin brother Lourdes is joining us. So thank you. So thank you for joining us. Before I get into some comments about you, could you please tell me the last movie you saw?
I actually watched Gladiator 2 last night, so it was decent.
Okay.
It was okay. Wasn't Gladiator the first one, but it was decent.
Your opinion of the Super Bowl? I kind of have a feeling what did you think?
It was a terrible game, but I was happy with the result. I was happy for JR.
That was not a terrible game.
It was a terrible game. It was
all right.
It was completely terrible. Not a competitive game.
What's the last meal you ate out, and where?
Where did I just eat? I just had sushi Sunday night.
Okay, nice.
Had Blue Sushi on the Rocks. It's my favorite local sushi place.
Nice. And what is your favorite alcoholic beverage?
Old fashioned or a bourbon on the rocks.
Okay. And your last but not least, what's your favorite place to vacation?
Were these prep questions that I didn't answer? Or are these all off
yeah,
the cuff,
you missed the email.
Per usual. Okay.
This is
per usual. Hawaii. Hawaii is my favorite place to vacation.
So we have a lie detector going in the background, so we need a baseline. So we ask those questions to develop a baseline, and the rest.
And now you can access any one of my accounts. You just answered all of the secret questions. So
absolutely. Now these are facts that JR told me about you, and I have to confirm whether these are true or not. So number one, JR maintained that you were a virgin until late last week. Is that true?
Technically it's been over a week now, but it's amazing because I have 2 kids. It's amazing what technology can do. But yes, it is true.
That is true. Isn't it true that until recently you thought MMTLP stood for My Mommy Told Larry Please? Is that true?
That's I'm gonna go ahead and I'll plead the fifth on that.
All right. And are you related to King Kurtis and Trombone Shorty? That's what he said.
Not anymore. It was through marriage.
Okay. And last but not least, isn't it true that in your high school yearbook, you were voted most likely to be a victim of a securities scam?
That's I think revisionist history would confirm that. Yes.
All right. Okay. All right. It's good to know. We've kind of like put that out and cleared it up. I appreciate your candor. Really, it's really important.
I love it.
So obviously we're here to talk about MMTLP, and we deem you an expert in the subject. So we kind of want to let you kind of go wherever you want to about discussing it. I have some topics I'll kind of throw at you as we go, and JR will jump in whenever he wants to ask you something, but kind of like bring us up to date. And I know there's stuff you can't mention, like all of us can't mention, but kind of brings up to date where we are. And then I'm going to start, we'll start posing some questions about it.
Okay. Well, a lot has changed, specifically since November. You may not have heard about this, but there was an important election on November 5th, and kind of changed the political landscape a little bit. But let me rewind a little further than that. In 2024, spring going into summer of 2024, we had great progress with Congress. Obviously, there's been a lot of grassroots efforts in this MMTLP community, really since probably May. I'll say May 2023, we were very organized. And May 2023 to May 2024, we had made successful inroads, obviously numerous congressional letters, the open letter that was signed by 74 members of Congress, that was delivered and responded to by Finra and kind of by the SEC on January 31st, 2024 and February 6th, 2024. And then the members of Congress that I will allude to as the flag carriers, right? The John Hancocks with prominent signatures on the front page. They were not satisfied with the answers, and a lot of it was just regurgitated from FINRA's prior responses and FAQs and prior communications. And so we had a lot of momentum for a potential hearing and or subpoenas being issued in regards to MMTLP.
Can I ask you a question? Could I ask you a question there? So the initial group, the John Hancock members, how many of those still remain in the current Congress? Do you know? That's
a good question. I don't know how much fallout we've had from there. We've only gained from that point.
Okay.
Additional interested parties, but that's a good question. I actually don't know that answer.
Would you guess though that the current Congress would be probably a better group for MMTLP than the prior?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Go on.
Better penetration rate on the existing members of Congress, and also there's some freshman senators and representatives that have also jumped on board as well. So Kurt, all of that kind of
Curtis,
setting the stage.
Let's just inject a question there. So have you seen a pivot from Congress since the election, or do you feel like it was a stair climb up with a natural kind of ebb and flow, or do you see like a light switch went off after the election and the response got more positive from Congress?
Well, and this is how Brian and I's interactions normally go on the telephone, is we interrupt each other so we can't complete each other's thoughts.
Is that true?
I'm only kidding.
Yeah, don't lie. That's not how our interactions go.
It's one person is stomping on the other person, and then eventually one of us concedes. But before I answer that question, so we're at all-time high momentum, and then the UPC information comes out regarding the Uniform Practice Code Committee, the members that were involved in influencing the U3 halt decision, and literally 2 weeks later, the SEC releases charges that I'm gonna say they were likely sitting on, lying in wait since September 2021 when that investigation was announced, and again in July everything came to a screeching halt for obvious reasons, right? Because now the SEC has formal charges against both of the former CEOs, George Palikaris John Berta. So from that point, from July to November,
do you think, let me ask you a question. Do you think that also kind of poisoned the congressional, the move in Congress, that some, at least, and again, I don't know, but it seemed like that some of the members might have used that as an excuse not to push at that point in time?
Yeah, for offices that had no interest in participating from the beginning, it was an easy crutch. So that became the form letter response. There's interesting things that have come to light, will come to light there regarding the timing and how these congressional offices were distributed that SEC information before it ever hit a PR newswire, which is interesting. We obviously had people that were trying to sabotage our efforts in Congress along the way, and we're kind of following the meetings that were taking place in the halls of Congress. But anyway, it's not surprising that it was used as an excuse for those that didn't want to help, and a valid concern. I will say it should be a valid concern for those that were advocates and were helping, and it needs to be addressed. So largely our efforts came to a halt in that July timeframe, and a lot of the discussions that continued from the core group of us that have been meeting with Congress all along, a lot of that time in these meetings was spent overcoming objections and how this was a precursor to MMTLP ever forming, and how it's interesting that the counter argument would be, if there was suspicion of fraud, why would you ever let this security trade on the OTC in the first place, right? So it's kind of hard to have it both ways, but it's a lot of time was spent overcoming that initial objection. And then we got to the point where, November, and we got to the point where we're approaching November, and everyone just said, let's just wait and see how the election shakes out. So since November 6th, the day after the election, I will say the willingness to revisit MMTLP and even advocate has been at an all-time high, right? So we have, and part of it happens to be, in my opinion, that everyone's got to kind of pick a side of the fence that they want to go on. You either want to support the president and the efforts that are kind of coming about in this new administration, or you're adamantly opposed to it. So we kind of figured out where we stood in many of these offices immediately, and it is convenient that the president happens to be a majority shareholder in a company that in April of 2024 was also suspected to be manipulated, right? To the point that the CEO, Devin Nunes, filed multiple communications, multiple SEC 8Ks denoting these suspects where the majority of the volume was being applied. He sent SEC communications to directly to Adina Friedman, head of the NASDAQ, sent to the four most important House chairs of Judiciary, House Financial Services Committee, Ways and Means, and Oversight. So we had all of that going for us, and someone that was going to be empathetic, which we certainly did not have under the previous administration in the executive branch, right?
I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Go ahead.
Because I like interrupting, because that's what lawyers do. They just interrupt all the time. JR and I haven't really done this yet, but at some point in time, we're going to tell you, because, we've been obviously involved in GTII, and the reason I'm stepping in now is because of what you just mentioned. They just hired as a advisor, maybe a future director, I don't know what his ultimate capacity is going to be, the former CEO of DWAC, which merged into DWT. And we kind of know where the GTII crowd are focused also. And there may be, and we'll have to see how it plays out, but JR and I suspect there may be a lot of overlap between the interests of GTII and MMTLP. We didn't originally, when we got involved, we originally didn't see that. But as time went on, just out of pure luck, it ends up that the people that may be coming into GTII are also interested in MMTLP. So I think that's maybe a hopeful sign for everybody out there also.
Right.
Yeah. When you start mapping out the parallels it will blow your mind. When you look at counsel, when you look at SEC chair nominee, that you may not know this, Richard, but the so for DWAC, for Digital World Acquisition Corp, the lead counsel for that was Brad Bondi, and Brad Bondi is the brother of Pam Bondi, our now Attorney General. So, and he also served as deputy counsel under the SEC chair nominee Paul Atkins, when Paul Atkins was previously SEC commissioner back in 2004 to 2008. So it's very interesting, the overlaps and the picks inside of this administration, and then how they tie in and experiences to these securities. Also, Brad Bondi also served in defense for against the SEC for Tesla and Elon Musk. So
okay,
lots of overlap.
In terms of the SEC, it doesn't. The new chairperson has not been confirmed yet, correct?
That's correct.
So I would guess until they're kind of situated, they're not going to be able to advance anything related to Mmtlp.
That's correct. At least directly from that position.
Because part of it is like the denial. I'm just jumping around a little bit. The S1 issue and that the recent kind of the recent requirement or putting the kibosh on advancing that appears to be the old SEC, not the future SEC. And even though the timing occurred probably after inauguration, I think this was something that was probably in the works beforehand and just kind of came out now. But it might be confusing to people seeing that the SEC is acting in the current time, but it's really not. At least my opinion, it's not really not. I don't know if you have a different view.
No, I don't.
Kurt, well, let me ask a question. So go back to Paul Atkins. Do we know why his confirmation hearing is so late? Is that just the luck of the draw, or is there a specific reason why he hasn't been put forth to the committee yet?
Yeah, I don't think it's late. It is, and I think there's a natural order of operations that takes place, and and how they're prioritizing positions within the administration. And it is one, logically, if the three of us were making the decision, if you have an interim commissioner that can serve the role, and they were effectively put on ice to not open up any new investigations, new probes, that it's at least a position that's covered. It certainly wouldn't take precedence over FBI director where you have a vacancy, right? Or, well, we could go through the other cabinet positions, but Gary Gensler, just looking at the most recent precedent, Gary Gensler wasn't confirmed until mid-April. So this time frame, and I would expect we see something on that front it'll follow the same pattern. There will be an initial hearing to investigate qualifications and history, and then an ultimate confirmation vote. So I would expect it sooner than later.
It'd be interesting to see if by the time there's a confirmation process, if Doge has already visited and exhausted their analysis of the SEC, and hopefully Finra too, because I don't know what they're going to do about that. I'm wondering about, they're examining the government. So the SROs, I mean, they stand in a very unique role because they're companies, but they kind of have a quasi-government role. And I wonder if, I don't know this, but I wonder if Doge could just terminate their contract, because FINRA must have I assume there must be an agreement between FINRA and the SEC reflecting what their services are, et cetera, because they're a private company. And it'd be, I wonder, because my understanding, I wasn't there. I haven't visited. I don't know for sure, but I have kind of a pretty strong, more than inclination that the SEC, that Doge is in the SEC right now and investigating the SEC. I think, it's not just the performance. I kind of think we have to kind of put this out a little bit. It's not just the performance or incompetence of all these agencies. The SEC is kind of unique because of their inaction or incompetence, it's caused significant harm to retail traders, cost us, billions upon billions of dollars. I don't think that's calculated in terms of like, cost saving. When they say there's a certain amount of cost saving they're trying to go, I don't think that's calculated in that amount. I think it should be mentioned, because I think that is a cost, because that's money lost by all, the retail citizens of the country. They're not going to spend it. They feel, they're obviously going to feel like they've been cheated as we have gone through. So it's interesting to me because Doge is obviously doing their thing, whether you like it or not. They're in it, and they're obviously being very assertive. So it'll be interesting to see, to me, how it turns out. I don't know if you
assertive is the right word. Assertive is absolutely the right word. They're being extremely assertive. The first couple sprinkles of Doge being in the SEC have started to come out, and if you follow the blueprint, speaking about this earlier this morning, if you follow the blueprint of day one, executive orders on January 20th were among the executive orders were ending the weaponization of federal government. And there were three called out in that document. They were in order: the Department of Justice, Securities and Exchange Commission, and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. And obviously DOJ is going through it right now, right, with Pam Bondi at the helm, but and Kash Patel for that matter. But the SEC obviously has to have a giant target, metaphorically speaking, on their heads from this administration. And and the first, if you follow the blueprint again from those executive orders, one of the others, and it's interesting to hear how Doge is kind of going about their prioritization when looking at all the federal spending and all the agencies from within the federal government. When the executive order was issued to pause foreign federal aid, and the USAID continued to make payments, and you had people calling that out intentionally, it was at that point that they kind of turned the microscope to USAID and where the money was flowing from that organization. And so knowing that this, after some of the information was coming to light, initially it was scrutinized how the contracts and the procurement was occurring, and just things that didn't seemingly make sense. That has started in the last 24 hours sprinkling out of the SEC. I saw a couple of notes about a Reuters contract with Westlaw. It's like a $245 a month contract, and the total contract procurement was something like $10 million. So I don't know if that was necessary, but that's the way the contract was displayed. But anyway, it'll be interesting. Every reason to believe that they are absolutely moving in. And if any indication by the opposition of Doge, last week, Maxine Waters and Brad Sherman sent a letter. The Democrats, leading Democrats on the House Financial Services Committee, they send a letter basically saying, don't look at the SEC, Doge. Please do not look. Please, please, please do not look. So yeah, I think safe to assume they're there.
Yeah, I hope they look at everybody in Congress. But here's I'm going to state, unfortunately, I have the cynical view. Here's my concern. My concern is, that you get rid of, I understand making cuts, getting rid of some agencies. There's got to be, I haven't looked at it, but there's got to be so much duplication, redundancy, incompetence. It's going to save us tons of money. The issue is, at times, do you overcut in certain areas, and does that cause concern? So, if they get rid of the SEC in effect and its powers, we are bare. We being retail traders, we're bare. There's nothing kind of out there. I think it's more that whatever regulatory body exists at the end has to have as one of its main goals to protect retail traders. It's got to be part of its call. It doesn't do that at this point in time. I think we're just kind of irrelevant. We just happen to be in the picture, by accident. But my concern is getting rid of it, and everybody's happy because it sucked, but we need a backup to be there. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think going back to Finra, the interesting piece, and you have dealt with this firsthand, Richard, but I think the community has dealt with this at large, FINRA and their regulatory immunity has been a difficult thorn in our side. Every approach, we get to a certain point, and then, whether it's going through arbitration or going through and essentially having the decisions axed because it was found that FINRA is performing a normal duty in the regulatory capacity. That's been the thorn. And the interesting piece is a lot of the key cabinet and appointees in this administration were authors of Project 2025, which is was a controversial policy doctrine that was adopted by the Heritage Foundation. But part of that, specifically the regulatory financial chapter 27, I've memorized it probably by word for word. I've read it so many times by now, but it references FINRA as essentially an opaque self-regulatory organization that is it should not exist, right? They don't call it outright unconstitutional, but the recommendation is to abolish FINRA outright and to absorb those regulatory responsibilities back into the SEC. And it makes sense because FINRA is not subjected to congressional appropriations. It's not subjected to really any level of congressional oversight. We scrutinized the SEC's budget, right? The $1 billion annually in salaries and wages that are paid out from the SEC. No one ever looks at FINRA, which is really the more important of the regulatory arms for the broker dealers and market makers. So if the, again, first 30 days of this administration and looking how they prioritize pausing what is also laid out inside of Project 2025 with pausing the CFPB and reforming it, and how quickly they did that, it looks like FINRA is firmly in the crosshairs of this administration. And it would not surprise me once Paul Atkins, when and if he is confirmed, that is one of the first duties is to they're not going to axe the organization and remove all regulatory oversight, but if they envelop that back under the SEC, that seems appropriate, and you start getting some accountability just in that move alone.
Did you want to say something, Brian, about immunity?
I was just going to make a comment that the Heritage Foundation doesn't have any love lost for FINRA. They've been writing articles about them since 2010, 2011, because I found some articles that went pretty far back where they gave them scathing reviews. So no one should be surprised that Heritage Foundation would be supporting those financial reforms in Project 2025.
Now, you don't have to support Project 25 or the Heritage Foundation, as I do not either. But I probably did about 10 videos on immunity and FINRA. And so I feel either get rid of them, and that's perfectly fine, because I agree. It makes no sense. The SEC should operate as that body. There's no reason to delegate that to a private entity. If you can't do it, then you shouldn't be existing, if that's the case. But I think if we got rid of him, as the counter to that, if we got rid of the immunity, then Mmtlp I think would have been over in like 2 weeks. Yeah. We would have been able to get whatever documents we needed and whatever information we needed, and that would have been it. And it's the stonewalling that FINRA can do. I mean, you mentioned when you started, it was obviously I experienced it directly. No discovery. And unlike any case in the history of mankind that's brought in court, you can develop a case as it goes on. So you have the right. So just imagine this. Imagine you're in a case, but the other side doesn't want to give you anything. They want to keep all the evidence to themselves. That's the way FINRA operates. They don't give you the opportunity. And obviously, for 2 years, we've been banging our heads against the wall. And I don't think there's, again, either they shouldn't exist or no immunity. I don't think there's any alternative. And I think also that should be something that Doge should really strongly consider. Again, is it have any value to us to have FINRA around in its current capacity?
Right.
Yeah.
And you look at the, just before we move on
from
that topic.
You shouldn't, I was just going to mention, you shouldn't have any governmental organization that the only way you can sue is to file a claim that they acted unconstitutionally. And that's basically what you have with Finra. That's your only course. It's your only recourse against them is to file a claim making some argument that they violated the Constitution. Otherwise, you have no other course of action against Finra.
Plus, they suck.
They
Right.
say, plus that's
Yeah.
the cherry topper right there. That's the most important fact.
I mean, yeah, bottom line is any of these things we're talking about, if they did a competent job, they were great, and they solved problems, we wouldn't be having these conversations. You know, it's kind of like you take Congress and you take it like 180 degrees farther. That's what we got with the regulatory bodies, and we have no power over them because we don't have any right to elect them or choose them or remove them. So hopefully, you know, in that respect, I think hopefully Doge will do something. I'm sorry, Brian, were you gonna say something?
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Okay, well, that's good when you do that. I appreciate that. So so Congress kind of has to get everybody in place, and you know, everybody's in a rush, obviously, you know, although it's 2 years plus since the fateful date, but everybody's still in a rush. But you know, realistically, you know, it might take 6 months for Congress to get all its crap together, everybody, all the chair people in place, everybody to get up to speed. You know, ironically, Hester Pierce is like deemed really good on the crypto side because she's like the queen of crypto. So she has, unfortunately for us, a place on at the SEC favoring crypto, even notwithstanding however crypto is performing the last couple of days. So we kind of talked about Congress and you know what Congress is going to do. We talked about a little bit about Doge. Do you want to add anything else about that Doge or anything like that, Curtis?
I think the obvious piece, right, is there's some opportunity costs that is obviously lost in the fees, the fines that are not collected. So you talked about the damage to retail, just the minuscule fines that they do for, you know, I would call it selective enforcement, but the selective enforcement fines, the percentage of those that they're recouping are nominal. And then, you know, we just read, and this is from, you know, from an organization that would support their activities, but they just wrote in the Wall Street Journal that they just wrote off $10 billion of fines that they couldn't ultimately collect. And, you know, that's 10 years of wages at today's wages for the SEC. That doesn't even factor in the opportunity of what should be, if there were, you know, actual punitive penalties that were conducted by or issued by the SEC, it would be multiples of that, right? But that's part of the problem. All of these organizations, these financial institutions, probably see their actions as a cost of doing business. So there is no deterring the actual behavior. So in addition to the tax recoupment that, you know, if we had capital gains for things that should have played out and were unfortunately interrupted by regulatory bodies, in addition to just the recoupment of taxes, I think the other piece is the fines that should be issued and those that are not collected upon. Those are very obvious.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because I think Brian JR, excuse me, and I learned it kind of when we were going through Alpine and we looked through the history of Alpine and all the fines. The SEC, Finra, they don't claim to be collection agencies. So they impose the fines, but they don't guarantee they're going to collect any money. So, you know,
Right.
in large part, a lot of those rulings are absolute BS because they know whether they're going to get the money or not. And and none of those fines that I recall relative to the entity that was being fined was material. It didn't affect their business in one iota. And like kind of you said, it's just a cost of doing business, probably factored into their budget for the year. They know, you know, Citadel, I'm sure, spends X number of dollars, you know, on legal every year. They know what they're going to spend. Doesn't really make a difference where or when, but they do. and it's just a cost of doing business, and they make plenty of money to make a huge profit. Now I guess Citadel is going to be a market maker in crypto too. Just what we need, I think, right? We need the Citadel to rear their head in crypto too.
Yep, they found another way to take your money.
Yeah, what could go wrong? What could go wrong? So we talk about Congress, and we talk about Doge, and there's also, I know there's ongoing litigation too. Are you familiar with the litigation that's ongoing? And I guess there was a recent discussion about NextBridge pursuing people who had, and it kind of relates to what you were saying, that had defamed maybe NextBridge or some of the characters in there, and they were going to go after, I think, for tortious interference, maybe for violation of JR's favorite section, the APA. Yeah.
No. They're not going after bad actors on Twitter under the APA. Come on now.
Are you sure? Can you be sure?
I'm positive. Don't make me fucking quote it.
Okay. That might be against the SEC or somebody like that. That might be against.
Yes, there you go. Thank you.
Because the SEC has immunity, but there's some exceptions to immunity, and one is under the APA for constitutional violation, for the Federal Tort Claims Act, for somebody who's individually acting on behalf of the federal government that violates your rights. There's a few exceptions, but basically it's a tough row to hoe. But I knew that was pretty recent that I saw that posting or whatever. Are you familiar with that? What was that?
I'm going to give a shout out to Drew because he schooled me on that one a couple days ago. So kudos to him for understanding how that worked. So
okay, did you express that?
Yeah, I said some snide comment that was like a thank you.
No. I mean, did you express that?
No. I was not familiar with that particular act, and that it was that there was a wedge in the immunity clause. So yeah, I thought the immunity was absolute, but after he did a write up, and then I went and did a little research, he's absolutely spot on. So yeah, and there's a go ahead.
Yeah, and there's a difference also. Like if there's if a federal person violates your constitutional rights, you have a certain claim. It's called I think it's a BIV. Not that I do any of this. This is back to not legal advice. I have no idea if any of this is true. I think it's called a Bivens claim. And if it's in a state official who violates your constitutional rights, it's a violation of Section 1983, the civil rights section, that applies to kind of any kind of deprivation of constitutional rights. So, but that was recent, that claim, and I don't know what litigation's going to arise out of that. And I don't know, and I'm hoping maybe I don't know what litigation is currently pending. That that's first part. Do you know what the current litigation is pending?
I could assume where that is going, and I have the same assumption that JR has. With the APA portion of that press release, the subtext is thick on that, on where they're going, and I think the other pieces in there. I think they get to paint broad strokes for anyone that may be professionally or in an unprofessional sense interfering with the company's operations, right? And defamatory statements, but beyond that, I don't know. I'm reading the subtext the same way that you two probably are as well.
Yeah, he's in that last posting. I don't know because I've never spoken to the man, never met him, whatever. But McCabe seemed pretty pissed. That kind of came through at the SEC's late kind of trying to put the kibosh on moving forward. And I understand. Listen, he had every right to be pissed because based upon what he said, it's more time, it's more money, and it's a problem, and it sounds intentional, and that's why they're probably threatening litigation. That's kind of the way I looked at it.
I initially thought, there's a couple of different avenues they could take under the Administrative Procedures Act. And I had initially thought that they would focus on the U3 help, but I don't think that's what they're doing. I think they're focusing on the S1 and the audited financials. I think that's what their intention is with the Administrative Procedures Act, because there's causes of action in there in the APA for unnecessary delay, making arbitrary and capricious decisions. And it makes sense when you look at what's going on with the audited financials in this.
And I didn't understand. I guess I saw the point. I guess it's an issue of when you take the charge, 2022 or 2024. They took it. I think they took it in 2022, and the IRS, or I mean the SEC, is now saying you should have taken it in 2024.
Right, and effectively redo the annuals.
Yeah, redo everything. What was that?
I was just going to say, while we're on this topic, there's a question out there, so let's not move on once we're done talking about this.
Sure. You want to take the question right now?
Well, and I had gotten this question on a space and I can't answer it, so I'm going to pose it to you. Kurtis, I'm sure you've heard this question as well, too. What impact does Sarbanes-Oxley have on this issue with these audited financials? Now, I don't know enough about Sarbanes-Oxley to even speculate on the answer, so I'm posing it to the two of you. And it was a question that was asked in the comments.
Well, yeah. I think a lot can be inferred. We don't see the communications, right? We're seeing the company's interpretation of the communications. We're not seeing the literal communication. So there's a lot that has to be inferred until those pieces of correspondence are all released. But if there's a pattern there, and the pattern is, again, asking for one thing and then doing a bait and switch at a later point in time, if that is the pattern, then where SOX would come into play, Sarbanes-Oxley would come into play, is if they're asking them to intentionally, right, according to the company and their auditors, to intentionally misrepresent the financials and the assets for that matter. So that will be interesting. And my personal opinion, and again, this is all subtext, I don't have any inside information greater than either of you have, but looking at how long it took to get to this point where you're releasing a press release, and we're talking over 2 years from when the initial registration statement post spin out was released. I can't help but think that McCabe likely thought that he was following what was requested in updating the financials, all in the hopes of an eventual approval, with the best of expectations. And then to read over 2 years what happened and what was disclosed in the PR, I think what will likely be revealed in the correspondence is exactly what I just described, which is you asked for one thing, you had no request for follow-up with how the financials were being presented, again, all the way back in 2023. And then you're switching up the accounting practices 2 years after the fact. And that's where they have a legitimate claim. And depending on how explicit they're asking them to go back in, usually when you read, and actually Mmtlp is a great example, while it was trading on the OTC, if you go back and on Edgar, they published the correspondence between the company and the SEC. And so you can see in between the initial registration statement and then the amendments, you can actually go back and read exactly what they wanted them to expand upon. And some of them are very specific, some of them are generic, but the correspondence as posted, which was what was basically promised in that press release, I think will paint a very clear picture. And then we'll see how legitimate the claims are that the company has against the SEC.
And I think the issue is false representation of the financial condition, which to me suggests you have to have, and again, I don't know. I didn't read the law. I haven't studied it, honestly, but misrepresentation suggests a level of intention. So I think you'd have to prove that up. So I think I understand why, if I were McCabe, why I wouldn't want to produce false information, because it could cause all kinds of, if they change the numbers now, there could be all kinds of consequences to shareholders, in terms of tax determinations. I don't know. It could be all kinds of determinations. Their lawyers would tell them to don't agree to that because you don't know all the possibilities out there. But I think in the grand scheme of things, if they didn't have any intention that they would be okay if they got that far. But that's not really the point. The point is that they've been held up for so long and it continues. And until that is resolved, they can't, at least they feel, and I'm talking for them, they can't move forward and they're stuck. So to me also, that would seemingly be something that the new SEC should have a different position on.
I would think so.
Yeah. And it may, again, just take some time for us to get there where we have, a body that's already established and knowledgeable. I'm sorry, JR, I cut you off.
No, I mean, this is probably another reason why the SEC is, or another reason the SEC is using to hold up the S1. But the beauty of all of this is the beauty of these delays and using the APA is Loper Bright is still such a new case. For them to file a claim under the APA for something like this, it's going to be a case of first impression. And judges love case of first impression. And remember, because Loper Bright overruled the deference doctrine under Chevron, the judge can look at all of the facts here and make a determination on their own. They no longer have to take the agency's word for why they're doing what they're doing. So again, people don't kind of understand the implications and ramifications of Loper Bright on the bureaucracy.
Yeah, and that's kind of was one of the things we like when we were talking GTII, we'd have Alpine sometimes, and we would support Alpine's position on certain issues because we liked the outcome procedurally, even if they were the biggest scumbags of all time. Which if you read their history, they were and still are, apparently, seemingly. But it's interesting. It's just interesting how it flows. So other than like the potential McCabe litigation, I think they hired Wes Christian. Was that what I inferred from what they said?
Christian and Azar.
Yeah. Is there other litigations you're aware of that's at a point that could advance the cause or might advance the cause that either you or JR know about?
I am anticipating, I should say, that there's, I think everyone was familiar with what was anticipated under metamaterials, and then obviously never came to be once they declared bankruptcy and the board dismantled the company. And in Nevada bankruptcy court, I would expect there to be something there. It's been alluded to. So if there's activity on that front, again, it has been alluded to with multiple tickers going all the way back to Torchlight. So
do you know if the trustee is knowledgeable as to what has gone on? And let me just clarify. So in a bankruptcy, there's somebody who basically manages the bankruptcy and is supposed to, in essence, raise as much money as they can and pay as many debts as they can. It's kind of basically their job. So is that person kind of familiar with the Mmtlp saga?
Extremely.
Okay. Because that's very helpful. I mean, in essence, kind of that's what we did in the GTII. It's not a trustee, but we got a receiver. And the receiver kind of took over and exercised a lot of power for our benefit. For almost every legal proceeding since day one, we've been shut down. Everybody shut down, kicked to arbitration, whatever. The bankruptcy court, Brian and I started talking about when we started talking about Sorrento Therapeutics, we kind of like stumbled upon it. But the bankruptcy court can be still a venue where you can get relief. So it's still possible. I hope so.
Okay. So we got a couple questions out here. Sue, Mr. Rollo's case was just filed. My recollection is that they're still in the response process from their defendants. I'm not clear of what's going on with Scott Trout's claim. I know he filed a writ of mandamus, but I don't know where that's at procedurally. Here's an interesting question.
Was that in state court? Was that in state court or in federal court?
No, they were both in federal court.
Okay.
I think I think Trouts is in Vermont, and Rollo's is in Connecticut.
Are those the only two that were?
Don't quote me on those.
Are
Those are the only
two?
two I'm aware. Those are the only two I'm aware of.
How about you, Kurtis?
Oh, and I believe I'm sorry, there was a gentleman that filed an amicus brief in the Taggart case.
Okay.
Okay, and the Taggart case was a class action against Metamaterials. But here's an interesting question, Richard. Don't go crazy on it because I know you love this topic. You know, does Jarkessi have any implications for MMTLP?
Well, it does because it can reduce the power of the governing agencies and their authority and their ability to judge. It's kind of like the back door of what we were talking about. We're talking about getting rid of the agencies. Jarkessi, Alpine argues the same thing, that the regulatory agencies just don't have the power that they have exercised to this point in time. And either they shouldn't exist at all because Congress didn't properly regulate them and control them, or they should be modified. What's your view, Brian, on Jarkessi, since you love that case too?
I think Jarkessi has limited application. I think some of the arguments in it can be used, but I don't think it's going to be a hugely supportive case for anything that has to do with Finra's immunity. But that's a debate that you and I have been having now since Jarkessi came down. So yeah.
But there were a bunch, you know, before you ask another question, there were a bunch of cases in the Supreme Court in the last 2 years that directly affect our rights through MMTLP, retail shareholders, dealing with federal regulatory bodies. And along that line, there was a big paddle sale at the boat store. It was quite an ordeal. Excuse me, are you finding a question, Brian?
I'm responding to people. That's what you told me to do.
You know, I know. Any other questions?
No. We're up to date on. I mean, there's one more question, but it's more appropriate for the end. But I'm monitoring.
Yeah, I'm throwing in a couple jokes as we go. I accidentally passed my wife a glue stick instead of chapstick. She's still not talking to me.
These are so good.
Yeah, they're awesome.
All right, now you got to think about this one. It requires a little thought. I asked my friend to spell wonton backwards. He said, "Not now."
Do you get it? Get it, JR?
Yeah, you get it?
Of course I get it. I got to listen to these stupid fucking jokes every.
And last but not least, what's Irish and stays outside all year? Patty o' furniture.
That one's bad.
See what I mean? I can't. I just can't.
Yeah, you can't.
This is why I focus on the comments during joke time.
I apologize. So we've talked about Congress. We talked about Doge. We talked about litigation. Do you see any other avenues that this is referring to Kurtis or to JR, any other avenues that are available, or that, you know, new tactics that we can use?
Certainly. Not ones that I'm going to elaborate on a ton, just because of the nature of our experiences over the last 2 years and people that would love to thwart every successful avenue that we've created. So
are you saying you're not gonna disclose your secret tactics? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not going to disclose the other bodies that affect change.
That was one thing I was going to ask you. So have you noticed, like, on social media, you know, it seems to ebb and flow. Have you noticed an increase, decrease in oppositional activity either way?
A substantial increase as of the last month, 6 weeks. Substantial increase. I have no enemies in life personally, so I'm not used to. I'm used to like bantering back and forth with JR, right? In a competitive, banter-friendly manner. I'm not used to actual personal attacks or threats, but I've come used to it in this community, just because there are people obviously with, I imagine, a lot of money at stake that don't want us to ask questions, and they don't want any level of accountability. So I've come used to it, but it's surprising the extent that they go through to try to undo progress that we have. So it's been like finding a balance between informing those that are interested parties, right? Shareholders that want to know how they can help and where they can help, and where their voice can help, but also simultaneously not revealing names, not revealing organizations, entities that are assisting, because unfortunately, I'll have to go through and unwind the crazy person that pretends or asserts themselves as a shareholder and is making threats, pretending to be an Mmtlp shareholder. Actually, having meetings with the highest level of the SEC, that is one of the initial claims stated back to myself and other shareholders is, we want to help. We recognize that there's a problem, but it's difficult when you have members of the community or investors making threats against officers of the SEC or Finra. And simultaneously, my genuine response to that is, I hope you don't loop us in, the normal people. I hope you don't loop us in with people that are making threats, but I also want you to be conscious of, there are people that, again, assert themselves to be shareholders and act erratically and threatening in nature, just to create a perception of shareholders acting crazy. But in reality, I have been subject to threats directly, and I know you have as well, Richard. And it's not something that's foreign to me anymore, but it certainly isn't deterring our involvement going forward. So everyone that's trying to create some level of accountability is likely going to be subjected to threats. It's part of, I guess, the movement for transparency and accountability. But
do you think it's the same characters or different characters?
I think we can kind of see a pattern here. Yes, I think there's a large overlap of characters that have been around. A lot of them have been around for years before Mmtlp was ever formed. It's interesting. It's very interesting. Communications, like with recently fired SEC regional directors, right? They go back to 2019 from certain individuals here. So it's there's a lot of the same cast of characters that have stuck around through the entirety of this whole thing with Mmtlp, but and there's a lot of the same characters that take opposition in every one of these investor communities, and you can see the overlap. And do
you think it's like a paid position, that there's a group, like there's a group organized and they get paid, a salary, and their job is to just kind of muck it up, create confusion, create doubt, and that's their job? You think there's groups out there that are acting like that?
Yeah, there are numerous articles, and actually almost written in an autobiography sense, the paid stock basher confessional, right? And I think everyone's seen a different iteration of that, but I have no doubt, right? And I think it's existed for a long time. It used to be on stock message boards, and now it's more formalized and certainly sophisticated. But I have no doubt the lengths of time. My interest in this is obviously as an investor, so I can dedicate what free time I can to help. But people that are not investors, and the amount of time that they're allocating to this, and not really doing anything productive or tangible, but literally just trying to undo progress or try to provide distraction, it would, I certainly wouldn't be doing it with my free time as a hobby. So it's hard to come up with any conclusion other than they're likely paid to do so.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting to me too, as I see people on social media, on X in particular, and they're dogging something. That's their whole pitch. I can't imagine they're too happy, if that's their focus. I don't really understand the point other than, they perhaps, okay, maybe there's some people that get off doing that, maybe, but otherwise, to spend that much time, either you're like super wealthy and you have that much time, to waste, or else that's your gig. That's kind of the way I see it. But it is really distressing because there's no way of distinguishing between those people. There's no kind of, there's no identification. They could, like on X, they could have a check mark and they could be qualified. And, it really is, it's sad. And ultimately, kind of, we talked about Citadel. I'm not blaming them for anything, by the way. It's not my accusation. Even though, like, when I walk out of my parking lot, sometimes I definitely look over my shoulder at times. But there's so much money out there. Citadel, all those hedge funds, so they're going to pay some guy 10 grand to do something. What's that? It's nothing. It's so much to their value to, it's in their financial interest to obviously keep us quiet, keep us down, and keep control over the greenbacks, Bitcoin, whatever it is. I'm sorry, Brian. I think I interrupted you again.
No. I'm just watching the chat to see if questions come up. That's all.
Okay. So kind of that's social media, and I feel bad for you because I know how that is. It is not fun, especially when I know you have little kids too. So if it's just yourself, you don't like it, but okay, it ends there. But when you got a family, that really is disconcerting, honestly. So I'm sympathetic to you. I'm not sympathetic to Brian, but I'm sympathetic to you. So
your kids don't matter, Brian.
Yeah.
That
should be on a t-shirt.
Yeah, his kids don't matter.
Heartburn.
Okay. So other than what we've discussed, do you have any other topics related to MMTLP that you'd like to address, Kurtis or Brian? Anybody?
I think we're just the overall theme. We're in. I don't want to disclose who just yet, but there are a lot of people that are coming forward on both sides of the political aisle that want to see change and that recognize, and some of them have been fighting for decades for changes in regulatory oversight. And I think everybody generally recognizes that, hey, the regulators are not necessarily putting their best foot forward. They're more so protecting market stability and not necessarily market integrity. If they both happen to follow along the same path, then that's great. They'll protect both. But wherever they diverge, they're going to prioritize stability over integrity all day, every day. And we felt that, and we have continued to feel that within MMTLP. The good news.
Can I ask you a question there? Do you think if Congress, people in Congress could not trade at all, period, that their feelings about retail investors would be different?
I think so. It's interesting when you talk about congressional trading and that it's allowed, that it's permitted at all. It seems insane when you realize the sensitive nature of the information that they handle, that the public does not have access to, or does not have access to on the same time horizon as what they have access to, or even direct involvement, right, in governmental contracts, procurement that they directly influence. And you see, I mean, it's been well documented over the last 4 years. And there are some Twitter accounts, Quiver Quantitative, Unusual Whales. Those two accounts do a phenomenal job of tracking congressional trades. And it's both sides of the aisle, right? It's not, this is an issue with one party or the other.
It's everybody. It's
everyone.
Yeah.
It is literally everyone. So it's in the same sense, we would all be appalled if professional athletes or even college athletes were allowed to gamble, and they're not even allowed to gamble on sports that they're not associated with.
They'd be kicked out of the league. They would be kicked out of the league for life.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's insane that it's allowed to persist. But yeah, to answer your question, I think it absolutely would be treated differently, or if they were directly affected in the same manner, right? And I think there's no better testament to that than, we didn't exactly have Trump as a flag carrier against market manipulation, or any of his, I'll call it lieutenants, Devin Nunes, Kash Patel, until DJT was subjected to significant manipulation, or at least the optics of manipulation. And then once you become victimized, the lights turn on and you realize what a racket it is. And I think there will be more that will become receptive to it when the curtain is pulled back. But yes, in short, yes. If they couldn't trade, they certainly and they were treated the same as every other retail shareholder, I think they would absolutely be more receptive.
So how can we get that past? The problem is who votes on that, right? That's the problem.
Yeah.
That they're all self-interested, and that seems like there has to be something outside of them that has to be done, because I don't think they're trustworthy enough, or at least enough of them are not trustworthy enough to give up the compensation. And again, my point was, I've taken the position, at least consistently, I'd pay people more and I would put them in jail longer. So, I'd give them a CEO salary, and if they took a dime, I'd stick them in a federal prison for 20 years. That would be my, the way I'd balance it. I'd try to keep them so they wouldn't stick their hand in the cookie jar. At this point in time, no matter who you vote for, you can't trust any of these people. And unfortunately for some of them, there may be some very, very reputable people amongst them who get, they get included in the everybody else. It's really is sad for all of us. Anything you want to, I'm sorry, anything else you want to add, Kurtis? You were going, I interrupted.
No, I 100% agree with your sentiment and solution there. And I think it's also a solution for regulatory capture as well. So same thing on the SEC side and FINRA for that matter. And you could really take the same thing and repeat that same blueprint elsewhere in the federal government, FDA, where you have it, a senior executive that leaves the FDA and then takes a position at a pharmaceutical company. I think they all need to be held to a standard that doesn't allow them to transition for some reasonable period of time to the very organizations that they're supposed to regulate. And if you can't do that, then you're never going to have full integrity. So
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think 100%. There has to be like a wall that separates them, because that's the only way we get integrity out of these systems. Otherwise, the greenback is very influential for all of us, and to expect otherwise is kind of like fantasy land.
Yeah.
And maybe so my way is to use money to buy their ethics in a sense, but to have,
because that's always worked.
Well, but to have the penalty really substantial, so that they know that that they'll be discouraged from sticking their hand in the cookie jar. And
No, I get it.
Yeah. So Brian, do you have any further questions?
Yeah. So, well, if we're winding down, I've been saving this one because I thought it was more appropriate for the end, but just one public service announcement. Folks, if you're going to put jokes out there, don't answer the jokes. So I will read them out loud so we can all kind of laugh together. So just as a, PSA. So I had two questions. I'll add, they're both the same, but they were distinctly different. So one individual asked, and this is directly at you, Kurtis, do you think this is going to resolve within the next 2 years? And then someone asked, do you think it's going to resolve before Christmas? And I thought those were more appropriate for the end. So Kurtis, what are your thoughts?
Did they say Christmas of what year?
This year.
Okay. All right.
I'll tell you so I'll tell you, pre-November, I was not optimistic that it was going to end timely. I've always been optimistic that just not just off of gut feeling, but just what we know. I think the way that FINRA has violated their own rules, I can explain it in 15 minutes or less to somebody that's completely unfamiliar with the scenario, and show them the language that is on FINRA's portal of what rules they have, whether the FAQs, the responses from their chief legal officer, Robert Colby, or from the very tippity top, Robert Cook. I think Using that, there are blatant violations that are not explainable. They're indefensible, in my opinion. But you have to get the right parties to put the pressure on them. And eventually, I thought that was always going to be the case. But with the administration change and with this appetite for significant shakeup in the federal government, there has been a complete tectonic shift that has happened since November, and really specifically since January. So I do personally, I hate personally, I don't use that word lightly. I hate putting timelines or figures around anything, because in my opinion, it only leads to disappointment. There are a multitude of variables that could change everything in a day. I didn't foresee, if you asked me June 14th, how quickly I thought that we'd have the necessary parties at the negotiating table to really figure out how to resolve this issue, I would have told you months, at most months. And then 2 weeks later, the SEC releases charges that caused us really a 5-month delay. So you cannot predict everything in the future, and I can't predict unforeseen variables, but the conversations that have taken place have been extremely meaningful, and they're with parties that we've never had inroads with before, that are in very, very significant positions of authority. I'll just put it that way. And obviously you have this windfall from the executive branch that we did not have in our favor with the previous administration. So it would not surprise me to see this resolved before the end of this year. Nothing's guaranteed, and that's just my opinion. And part of that opinion is based on how swiftly this administration has moved, which was at a much faster pace than I anticipated, but they're moving at a pace that I don't think anyone has ever seen before. So, and it's not that complicated. It's not the resolution. It's not that complicated. It's just a matter of what variables they want to show, what they want to accomplish out of this. Some of those things I'm never going to be privy to. I don't think any of us will be privy to, but I think it is feasible that it could finish before the end of this year.
So let me answer that question a little differently. So, when someone asks, because they do it in law too. So they'll do it this way. They'll ask, somebody will come in and say, what's the likelihood I'm going to win? So, kind of the same kind of things. It's a guesstimate. That's kind of best. Maybe it's like, the better question is, am I more likely or less likely? That maybe that's kind of what you could say. So maybe Kurtis could say it's more likely than not that something will happen in the next year or two. That might be, a reasonable statement. But, saying, because literally people want a percentage, they'll come in. What percentage is I'll win the case? I'll say it's 59%. What does that mean? It's slightly more than likely than not, but it's no guarantee. And that's kind of the best we can do. So it's a tough question. I remember like day one, I remember December, January, those days, those same questions, and people would ask, and we would, part of it is you also want to make people feel better. You don't want to give them a hard answer. So you might be slightly more optimistic, or might present things in slightly more optimistic a time frame than you might think otherwise. So, but it's a tough question to give an answer to that kind of question. And I understand why people want to ask, though. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it's totally reasonable to ask the question. I just don't think without all of the variables, all the pieces on the table being foreseen, I don't think you can make an accurate assessment of when it's going to resolve. And it is really contingent on what methodology you resolve through. And the good news is all the necessary parties are confirmed absent Paul Atkins, right? So I think, and that should be a breeze. He is more than qualified, so he'll have an overwhelming amount of support. If this had to solve through a legal route, I'd be asking you guys, the You know, what's your anticipated timeline? And that is not a favorable timeline. I realize that if we had to go through acquiring, even using some additional rulings in our favor that were referenced earlier, that's going to be likely years before that could be unwound.
Yeah.
Versus a mandate coming from a power with authority to issue that mandate, to get the very important variable of what is the share count? What is that variable that we have no idea? We know partial view, but we don't have a holistic view of what that variable is. And until that is revealed or confirmed, even if it's not confirmed to the public, I think it's going to be pretty hard to compel some form of resolution. So,
and I agree with you in terms of the legal, and I'm sure Brian would say the thing. You know, from this point in time, to get a legal conclusion without and then there might be an appeal following that. You know, literally, there may be people that aren't alive by then that are shareholders. That, you know, this is not like a super young crowd, and it's also it's not just that. Litigation is really emotionally traumatizing, and people are just constantly they have to suffer through the same humiliation over and over again. It's just not emotionally healthy for people. Beyond it takes so long to get there, it's just not a healthy process. If we had to rely upon that, you know, I'm a lawyer, obviously I sue people and I've been sued. Luckily enough, I've been sued too. But, you know, if we had to rely upon that, unfortunately, that's just not a great remedy. I don't know. You have a different opinion, Brian?
No, I mean, you and I have talked about this at length. I think the other thing is you know, you're up against an institution that has unlimited legal resources, and that, you know, if you can't find an attorney that's willing to fund a claim and put the time in, that's a high hurdle to get over. That, coupled with the fact that you're up against that carte blanche immunity and the arbitration clause. I mean, and you and I talked about this very, very early on. That arbitration clause is almost impenetrable. You know, so you're going up against an organization where you have one or two claims, and you're only now starting to see the law develop that supports the argument to pin them up against the wall. And you know, you really only have 3 or 4 cases that support that argument. So the law is still immature when it comes to, you know, fighting Finra. So it is to some extent a losing battle in the courtroom. And if you are successful, you still have 2 layers of appellate courts you have to get through, because they're going to run it all the way up. And so you're looking at years.
And this is the game changer, and the you know, the thing that we couldn't have foreseen playing out until you have you have to have control in both bodies of Congress in order to make this happen. But until you have an administration that has an appetite for removing Finra as an organization and the regulatory power. So that's where we stand now. It'll be interesting to see how the landscape changes, and when and if it changes. And if it does, then that obviously changes the legal time horizon and expectations as well. Because I think I share the same sentiment that you both have, and that is, if you were to achieve discovery, they're at the table immediately, because the amount of exposure that this provides, I don't think they necessarily want all of that in formalized in a legal setting.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I agree 100%. And kind of when Brian was talking, it reminded me of something. So getting rid of Finra, you know, we talked about, I want to get rid of immunity. You were talking about getting rid of them entirely, which I'm okay with also. But that removes the arbitration issue also, right?
Correct.
So there's no more Finra. There's no arbitration. That arbitration is so slanted against retail. It's, you know, obviously people have discussed it at length. It's not for us. So, you know, maybe they still exist, but maybe there's no immunity and no arbitration, and we have the right to go to an Article 3 court, which was some of the discussion. We're talking about Jerkesi in those cases. That's kind of the discussion that was had there. And then we'd have discovery, and we would have the end. again, I really think that is the bottom line. That's why I always thought the immunity issue was the key, because that would give us discovery. And I agree 100% that, everybody makes cost benefit analysis, right? What's it going to cost me? What can I do? They would decide, if we let this go public and we extend it out there, there's going to be a lot of damage. So let's get it resolved now. And that's just kind of the way it would go. And again, they could buy their own insurance. They don't, there's nothing preventing them from buying insurance, which also provides kind of a financial protection to all shareholders. Anyway, I'm just babbling now. Any other questions, Brian, that you see out there?
No, I think we got the big ones, the reoccurring ones that you and I get all the time.
Yeah.
So
well, okay. Well, obviously we always love when you come on. First of all, I should ask you: do you have anything else you want to add, Kurtis?
No. I mean, I could talk for days about everything that we've dealt with Mmtlp, some of the key questions, but I think instead of talking about it ad nauseum, well, let's see how some of these things play out here in the next couple of weeks.
One thing you said that kind of struck something. You talked about it. You could distill it now in like 10 minutes, and that is like a real problem. Like at first, just thinking back, this is like a 45-minute conversation talking about all kinds of stuff that nobody could follow, and it takes it. This how it happens. Actually, it's interesting. You develop this expertise in a topic, and as you develop an expertise, you can really simplify the story. But you need to simplify the story because people won't understand if you go on for 45 minutes. So
Correct.
I really appreciate the fact that you've been able to distill it down to like a real story where people can pick it up and they can't ignore it, because sometimes people use that as a reason for not paying attention or ignoring it. So I thank you for being able to understand it to that degree.
Well, thank you. You both have helped me along the way. So thank you.
Yeah, Kurtis, thanks for coming. And we got one more question, and it's Roaring Titty. And yes, we're gonna do some type of MMTLP update once a month. We don't know what it's gonna look like. We don't know what it's going to look like, but we're going to do something once a month because we've been getting a tremendous amount of questions. So that's why we invited Kurtis.
And part of it is we will try to get like personalities in the community and have them come on also.
I mean, I don't really care for Kurtis. I tolerated it tonight, but that's okay.
I'm sorry. I had to stop you. Did you say, could you repeat that name one more time? I thought
Lourdes. It's Lourdes.
It was Roaring Titty. Roaring Titty.
Just want to make sure I heard that correctly. Thank you.
Yep, that was right.
Is that the same guy from GME? Same guy?
No, I think it's a different
Keith
guy.
Gill. Yes.
That's wow. That's great. That's great. I appreciate you.
Listen,
Keith,
I don't make the names up. I just read them as I see them.
Okay.
Roaring Titty.
All right. Anyway, I wanted to thank you obviously for your time and for your expertise and all the information. And you have if you have something that's important to you and it affects the MMTLP community and you want to express it, we're always a forum for you at any time. We always love enjoy having you here. To everybody else out there, we always appreciate everybody who listens, and spread the word. Hopefully you got some information that's helpful for you. Contact Doge. Listen, everybody can contact Doge. I think it's Doge_SEC. I think that's the Twitter handle. Go after it. Express yourself. If you don't express yourself, nobody's going to know. I encourage everybody to do that. And the more the merrier. Like anything else, probably the more context they got about MMTLP, the more likely it is to pay attention. So thank you, everybody out there, for watching. If you have any questions after this, put them in the chat. We'll try to answer them. And again, we'll try to do this on a regular basis so everybody can keep up to date on MMTLP. And we hope at one point in time, the only thing we will be covering is the post-party after the conclusion of MMTLP. That's the day we're all waiting for, I think, in this group. So again, thanks, everybody. Thanks especially for Kurtis for being there. And everybody.
Thanks
for having me, guys.
Our pleasure. Everybody else out there, have a great night. Be well. Take care of yourself. And see you soon.